Hey everyone, Professor August here, and today I'll be talking about this book, Marjan Kamali's 2024 novel, The Lion Women of Tehran. I'm so happy that I picked this book up and read it because the themes of this book are so relevant to what's going on in the world today. And even though the book spans decades, it starts off in the 1950s and comes all the way to the 21st century, but the characters and the politics that are involved in this are really relevant to our current world. And I'm so happy to have an Iranian American author that we can touch on and a new novel that we can add to our Asian American corpus of materials. This book is primarily about friendship and reality, how reality brings people together and tears them apart. I don't think I've come across many novels that intertwine the history of like the political history of Iran with the characters and what's happening to them individually. There are tons of books about Iran. Of course, there are history books about the 1953 coup that overthrew the democratically elected prime minister. There are hundreds and hundreds of books written about the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which has given us the current government of Iran, the Islamic regime. So, there are a lot of those books. And of course, we have novels that, focus on characters and novels that focus on history and politics. But this novel sort of intertwines those two things. But it isn't a book about politics. It's a book about friendship. And after you like sort of start reading through by the midway point of the book, you start seeing that politics and the way that it's shaped really does shape the individual. So there are a lot of us living here in the United States who were just not engaged in politics, and we don't think politics matters or impacts us individually. But the reality of the situation is politics does impact the way that we interact with one another, and it impacts the way that our sort of culture is shaped. And we do see this coming through with the characters. So the two characters in the book are named Ellie and Homa. They're the main characters, and there are a bunch of other ancillary characters who are important to the story, but not so much as the two main characters. And they're very different from one another. Ellie is of one class, and she's very focused on herself. She's not a bad person by any measure. She just makes bad decisions sometimes that affect other people negatively. And Homa, on the other hand, is very focused on the bigger picture. She's social justice minded. She wants things to work out for everybody. She wants equity in society, and she wants to grow up to be a judge. So these two sort of the dichotomy between these two characters really does drive the plot for us. There's the book starts off when they're young girls and they meet at school, and it spans decades. It goes from the 1950s all the way through the 21st century, but really just focuses on the period between the 1950s and the 1980s, because those are the periods in which we see the major shifts in Iranian politics and life. So in 1953, there's a coup d'etat that overthrows the prime minister, and then in 1979, we have the Islamic Revolution. And so that time frame gives us a sort of snapshot of the characters' lives and how politics impacts them individually. Okay, so the characters are really what make up this book. The two main characters are Ellie and Homa, and later on in the book, we get introduced to Bahar, who is Homa's daughter. Ellie she's a likable character. She's not, evil or anything. She makes some decisions that impact people negatively. I kind of think that's the nicest way of putting it. She's really interested in herself and the way things affect her. And she's kind of one of those, she's jealous of other people for no good reason, even though she has a lot going on in her own life and things that she has that she can be grateful for. She looks at other people, even people who have less than her, and sometimes feels jealousy towards them. And I think that's a normal emotion to have. You know, like we all have aspirations and envy, and I think that's just a real thing that we're reading with Ellie. Ellie grows up with a rich family. Her father passes away, and then she's forced to move to the downtown area of Tehran, which is kind of like the boondocks, the not rich area. And that's where she meets Homa. Homa is just this young girl who is really out there. She's confident and she knows what she wants to do in life. She wants to become a judge. And she wants to become a judge because she's less concerned with what's happening to her individually and much more concerned with what's happening around her and to the people around her and to the country as a whole. And what's interesting is the book takes place between the 1950s and the 1980s, and that's the time period where we see the two major, Iranian political changes. 1953, we get the coup d'état that overthrows the prime minister who was democratically elected, and then in 1979 we have the Iranian Revolution, the Islamic Revolution that gives us the regime that we have today. And so as these things are happening, you get to see how the politics of society and the world impact individual lives. For Ellie, she's not super interested in the politics. Like, she listens to people and she's interested in what's happening, but she's not the person who's going to go out and protest on the streets. She's the one who thinks other people are going to take care of this for me. I'm just going to live my own life. Homa is the one who says, other people are not going to change the world for me. I have to change it for myself. And so that's the dichotomy that we have between the two major characters. Both of them are great. Both of them are enjoyable reads. And there wasn't really a point in the book where I thought, I don't like these characters. That happens sometimes when I'm reading a novel and I think like halfway through the novel, I'm just like, I can't stand this person anymore. But those two characters, you don't get that. They're kind of like, they're in it. They're really lovely with one another when they're together. And then some, reality sets in once in a while and the friendship frays and they go their separate ways. This happens a couple times in the novel. So early on, when the two girls meet as schoolgirls, they're elementary kids, they become really fast friends. And then Ellie's mom figures out a way to get them back to the rich area of Tehran. So the two girls are pulled apart from one another and their friendship sort of stagnates. And then we fast forward to their high school years and their college years, and they reconnect and they become friends again. And this is like their college years are when you see the major differences between the two, because Ellie is, again, she's kind of focused on her personal life. She falls in love with a boy named Mehrdad, and she thinks Mehrdad is gonna set up a pretty cushy life for her, and he does. Mehrdad manages to get a job in the United States. So in 1977, the two characters, Mehrdad and Ellie, they move to the US. Homa stays behind and she's really interested in becoming a judge. But while they're in college, something tragic happens. And I'm not going to say what, but Ellie does something that fractures the friendship. And this changes the trajectory of Homa's life in really negative ways, but in some positive ways as well. And after Ellie moves to the United States, she pretty much loses contact with Homa because Homa is left dealing with the ramifications of what happened. Um, and so we get the chapters go back and forth between the two characters. So we get some insight from Ellie living in the United States as an immigrant and dealing with just sort of cultural loss, not understanding the way the US works and having to rely on the kind heartedness of the people around her to help her get through. And then we go back to seeing Homa's perspective, and we just see that light, that the verve that she had as a young girl has just diminished. And this is such a real thing because we see this in our own lives. Like when we're kids, we think we can become anything, and then over time, reality just kind of like grinds us down, and we get sometimes, not all the time, sometimes we get to the point of like, I just need to survive. I just need to get through this. And so we see that happening with Homa. So to me, Homa is like, she's not the major protagonist, Ellie is, but Homa is the more interesting character because we see her delving in and out of politics as reality allows her to. And I think, like the themes of this book are really interesting and the history of it is really interesting because we're like, there are tons of books written about Iran. There are tons of books written about, the history of Iran. But we think about the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s of that region as just so far away and removed from our daily lives in the United States. But you do kind of see the creeping in of autocracy and dictatorship in this book and the things that are happening. Like, so in the 60s, the Shah of Iran makes all of these revolutionary social changes. This is the White Revolution in the 1960s, where we get like tax reformations and agricultural reformations and women's rights. So women are able to go to college, they get the right to vote. So all these positive things are happening in the 60s, but at the same time, the Shah is preventing people from speaking their minds, and people are afraid of speaking out publicly against the Shah and the regime because of the secret police who will literally disappear them if they say something untoward, or they might get accused of being communists, and again, they'll be arrested and put in prison. And so a lot of people, especially young college students like Homa and Ellie, they're disillusioned with the Shah and they see these positive things that are happening, but they want more. And they push and push and push to the point where the Shah is then overturned. He leaves Iran and there's a revolution that takes place. And so Homa is really happy, well, a lot of people are happy that the Shah is gone, but in that weird period right after the Shah leaves Iran in 1979, there was no clear understanding of what was going to come next. It could have been a democratic republic. It could have been a communist state. It could have been an Islamic state. And there were different factions vying for power. And it just so happened that Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the leader who sort of helped spurn all of the changes in 1979 and the ouster of the Shah, he comes to power. And he's really able to consolidate power because of Saddam Hussein, weirdly, who was the president of Iraq at the time. Saddam Hussein attacks Iran, and that solidifies the Islamic regime's power because it sort of forces a unification around the new Islamic regime against an outside power who's trying to invade them. And so you see with Homa, this, she and everybody else is going through this, the overturning of a dictator and being replaced by something that she doesn't think is better. In fact, it's regressive and women lose a lot of their rights. And so this part of the book, I think, is super interesting for those of us living in the West, because in recent years, we've seen liberal democracies under attack, and we see far-right movements and religious movements trying to pull back a lot of the hard-fought rights that individuals have gained, like women's rights and queer rights, and the ability to say what we want and speak against the government. So the themes in the book really do speak to what's happening in the West as well. So I think there are lessons that we can pull from this novel. But it's done in such a cool way because it's not didactic. It's not a history book or a politics book. It's told through the lens of these two major characters, Ellie and Homa, who are just trying to navigate the world and navigate their own lives. And sometimes they succumb to reality, and we all do. We all have to make decisions that impact ourselves and the people around us and our loved ones. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't work out. I think this novel is really approachable and easy to read. It's about 300 pages, and the chapters are fairly short. So if you're short on time, you can read a chapter or two and put it aside and then come back to it. Because of the structure of the book, we're going back and forth between Ellie and Homa's perspectives and time periods. The time periods are pretty linear, so we're not jumping through time, and so it's pretty easy to keep track of what's happening when. The language is fairly easy, so it's not complicated English to have to read through. It's approachable and a light read. I wouldn't say it's a light book. It's a light read so that you don't have to have a dictionary next to you the whole time. Persian is used pretty often in the book, but it doesn't hinder anything. So if you don't speak Farsi, that's totally fine. A word pops up and then it's either translated immediately afterwards, or a Persian word is used, and then as you finish the sentence, context tells you what it means. So it's not a problem if you're not familiar with Persian as a language. The characters and the themes are really worth reading and getting to know, and I think it is so impactful for our current environment politically. So I do think it's an easy read and worth picking up. I'm curious to see what other people are thinking about this. I'm going to be searching the YouTube and the internets to see what other people are saying. But I do highly recommend it, and I think it's a great read. If you're interested in purchasing it, I have the publisher's information in the link below. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe below. Catch you in the next video.